You're listening to Drummer Daily, the only daily podcast just for drummers. Hey, this week on the podcast, I am trying to see if I can get a few more reviews for my podcast on iTunes. And I would love it if you could take 10 seconds and do that for me right now. So just go to iTunes and search for Drummer Daily and just leave your honest rating and review. You can click on the star rating and just type 1 or 2 sentences about what you think about the podcast. And that would be so helpful to me in keeping this podcast going. All right, thanks, and on to the show. Welcome back again to Drummer Daily. You're here, I'm here. The drums are here for me. Maybe they're here for you too. But that's all we need. And you know, actually, while we're talking about it, we don't even really need the drums. We just need you and me and the dream of glorious drumming. And I know I have that dream. I think you do too, because you're listening to this podcast. I am so glad you're here. Today I'm gonna do one of those podcast episodes where maybe this isn't really a harsh thing. I was gonna say it's kind of harsh, but I don't think it's harsh. I'm gonna say, but I am gonna say, I guess I'm gonna talk about something that is going to acknowledge the fact that not every drummer is a good drummer, and that's always hard for me. I guess I'm a peacemaker, or I don't like to ruffle feathers or anything like that. So it is tough for me to talk about that, but I feel like I need to talk about that, and so we're gonna do it today. So I am a very, very avid reader. I read tons of books all the time. I've always got a stack of books, or get my Kindle loaded up with something. And I try most of the time to keep it to one nonfiction and one fiction at a time, one of each kind of book at a time. And the nonfiction book is normally a business book. Sometimes I'll have 2 nonfiction books going. It'll be a business book and like a spiritual kind of theology type book of some kind, something that kind of makes me think more in that direction as well. And then also fiction just for entertainment, something to read, but then also a business book. But right now I don't know how this happened, but I'm in the middle of I think 3 nonfiction books and then a fiction book at the same time. A couple of business books, a spiritual formation book, and like I said, a fictional, an entertainment book. It's funny. I've conditioned myself to, if I'm going to read, I either have to read, it's not quite warm enough to do this all the time right now, but if I'm going to read during the day, if I'm going to read at all and not fall asleep, I have to read outside. I feel like the wind and the weather and the sights and the sounds keep me just distracted or stimulated enough other than reading to keep my attention focused and not drift off to sleep. I got one of those habits of reading right before bed every night, and while that's a great way to develop habits and make sure you read, what I learned was that every night that I read, the amount of time I could read before I just started dozing off got shorter and shorter, because I was training my brain and my body, all right, when you're reading, it's time to shut down and go to sleep. So I have to change my environment now just to make sure I can do it. Anyway, all that to say, I read a lot. And currently one of the nonfiction books I'm reading is called The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. And it's a business book. It's about, I'm sure you might have figured out, I'm an entrepreneur. I do a lot of different things to help drummers. And that's kind of part of my passion is entrepreneurship but also helping drummers. So I read a lot of business books, a lot of entrepreneurship books, things like that. And this 10X Rule book is all about, it's funny because I think I mentioned in an episode before, maybe in a newsletter a few months ago, I was like, hey, this book, I'm going to read this book. I didn't read it yet, but then I actually made a whole episode just on the summary of the book, because it was that inspiring to me. And so anyway, I finally got the book. Actually, my parents got it for me for my birthday. which was a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm so excited that I have it. Anyway, so I've been reading this book, and it's all about the idea that most of us should apply a factor of 10 times to if we're trying to be successful, we should apply a factor of 10 times to our goals, our efforts, and what was the other thing? It's our goals and our efforts and one other thing. All that to say, I can't remember what the third one was. I'm still reading the book, so you got to give me time. But it's the idea of we don't set our sights high enough, and then we don't put our efforts high enough to reach those higher sights. And what happens is most of us end up, as far as success in business or other areas of our life, end up with something very average. And so I'm going to kind of try to put this into drumming perspective in a second, but here's what I mean. And again, I don't, I guess the best way to, I think I thought of an idea of a way to kind of put this in a way that's not too harsh. So back when I was in high school, and I might have mentioned this story before too, but people thought I was a genius. They thought that I was some kind of savant because I got good grades. I didn't seem stressed out about school. I wasn't so obsessed with school and GPA and everything that it showed through in my personality and my approach to life. People didn't think of me as a bookworm or I wasn't an overachiever who just got so stressed about my GPA staying up or anything like that. I wasn't involved in academic clubs or anything like that. But I also wasn't a slacker. I didn't fail any classes. I didn't even I was getting A's and B's. I wasn't getting any C's or anything like that. I was doing pretty darn well. And while I do think that I have a pretty good, head on my shoulders, the difference between me and other people just like me who were failing was that I just was willing to do my homework, do the work that was asked of me, and just kind of show up and do things. And what I realized is that alone was above average. It didn't overtake my life, but it was just above that. It was a little more effort than I guess most people were willing to do. And I guess my point with that is if you want to put in the amount of work, here's the thing. If you want to put in the work that's just like everybody else, if you want to practice drums just like everybody else, if you want to put in the amount of effort on the drums that everyone else does, if you want to just basically imitate everyone else and be just like everyone else that you see and how much effort and how much work and how they approach their drumming, if you want to be just like everyone else, then you need to be prepared to have your drumming sound like everyone else. And everyone else, and I mean most drummers in the world, are painfully average. They're not awful, and they're not amazing professional drummers. They're just average, and it's boring, and it's not enjoyable. And I would guess that most drummers who care about their drumming but are just average feel like they're probably stuck in a rut. But the problem is that all of those drummers who are just average are approaching their playing in a very average, just like everyone else way. So my encouragement to you is, if you don't want to be average, then stop approaching your playing like people who are average. You've got to find people who are above average, who are extraordinary, and then try to be like them. approach your playing like them. You can't become like someone who's extraordinary by putting in average amounts of work and by putting in average types of work and approaching your drumming just like everyone else, because everyone else is average and boring. And talent is never going to be enough to get anybody by in the drumming world. You've got to approach things at least differently than your neighbor who plays drums or your buddy who plays drums who is average. I'm not saying you need to be competitive. I'm not saying you have to say, I want to be better than that guy. But you actually might want to be better than that guy. And I don't mean so you can compare yourself and say, I'm better than that guy. But you might look at someone else and say, you know what? Their drumming is probably average at best. And for myself, I don't want to be average at best. I desire more for myself. And so if that's you, I want to encourage you to look at drummers who are extraordinary and then do some research into how they practice and how they approach their drumming. And then do some of those things. You can't be a pro if you don't act like a pro first. You don't wait to become a pro and then start acting like a pro. That's not how that works. And I really want to reiterate to you that average is boring. Years and years ago, I worked for a record label and got pulled into a music festival where I was a judge they had a talent show, an all-day talent show for bands. And it was, you have to kind of think like American Idol was hot at the time. And so we were, me and a few other judges were there, and I was all excited about it. I was like, oh man, it's going to be great, because my thinking was like what you see on American Idol, which is, they come into the judges and the bands are either really terrible or really great. And my thought was, if they're really terrible, it'll at least be entertaining. And then, obviously if they're great, then great. That's really exciting too. But what I didn't think about was the fact of, those shots like on American Idol when they show the arena full of people, who come to try out, that most of those people didn't make it on the show for good or bad reasons. They didn't get on the show because they were average and boring. And that's what I discovered about when I went and did this talent show. It was that most of the bands were just fine. It was fine. It wasn't like they were bad and they weren't great, but it became really hard to offer critique to bands who were just average. And so it got to be so boring, the judging of this competition, because average is extremely boring and also extremely common. So if you don't want to be average, don't do average things. Approach your drumming in an extraordinary way, and you might actually discover that your drumming becomes extraordinary. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.